that so many people made it here on a rainy day. We appreciate your attendance. So all who are able, if you would please stand for prayer. Join in the lead with that, please. Our God, our Father, the Creator of all, to you we give all honor for everything in life and for the many blessings that you have given us. We give you thanks for the meal that we have today. We give you thanks for the volunteers that helped bring that to us. Thanks to the Bronstein Foundation. And we always think of those who serve the country. We give great thanks for them. And at this time of year, with Thanksgiving approaching, it is especially good to remember and think of each individual that we know, that we can give thanks for, each situation that your hand has taken us through, every blessing that we have. We'll give you great thanks. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me in reciting the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the hawks bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you, Larry. We have a few announcements before the program gets going. I'm going to invite Eric Marshall to tell you about them.
Thank you so much. Hi everyone, I'm Meredith. I'm the chair of events here at the museum, and most all of you interact with me in some capacity to RSVP for your Lunch and Learn every 2 weeks. So part of that, just a reminder, I have a lot of email inboxes that I manage and the voicemail. I will get emails to 6 different email inboxes to RSVP, but I would like you to please try to send it only to lunchlearn@evansvillewartimemuseum.org, because even if I'm out of town, someone else can get your RSVP, and then you still get fed here every 2 weeks. Along with the lines of the Lunch and Learns, we did have a change in the scheduling in December, so we still are having Ms. Jackie Harding next time talk about her family's connection with Rosie's working here in Evansville. She is part of the American Rosie the Riveter Association. And then after that, we did have a change, so Bill Turney is not going to be here talking about the USS Liberty. We will be having Dr. Patrick Thomas talking about some excavations in Greece during the Bronze Age period. So if you, the schedule has changed. If you've not picked up a new Slim Jim with our calendar of events, it is updated through September of next year. And then, and yeah, I can't remember what the other announcement is, but I will hand it back to John to introduce our speaker. Thank you guys so much.
So this is a special day, really, really special, and we've got a good speaker, Spike Bell, but there's also something that's happened in the last day or two. It involves one of our volunteers. Norman? Where's Norman? Norman, please stand up. Norman's birthday, his 90th birthday. He's one of our great volunteers. And since I'm not a singer and Larry Head is, he's going to lead us in singing Happy Birthday to Norman.
Yeah, right.
Ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Norman. Happy birthday to you.
Our topic today talks about the escape from Corregidor and our former governor, Edgar Whitcomb. To make that presentation is Spike Bell. Spike was born here in Evansville. He's a Rex Monday graduate. He got his pilot's license in 1972. He's been rated for any number of different types of aircraft, including as a corporate pilot for Flanders Electric for 28 years. So Spike, please come up here and tell us about the escape.
All right, first thing, can everybody hear me? Good? Okay. Oh, boy. Oh, thank you. Technical difficulties. Thank you. Well, good morning. Thanks for attending today and your support for the Wartime Museum. I don't know if you know or not, but the museum has a lot of very, very dedicated volunteers who put in a lot of hours. I know I've been here for several years, and they put in a lot of hours, and they've made the museum a very valuable asset for this community, and I'd like to recognize them with a round of applause. They're all around us. Edgar Dowd Whitcomb was elected the 43rd governor of Indiana in 1968. And I'd not heard of him until I saw an article in the Evansville newspaper a number of years ago about a transfer of 144 acres. And I'll pick that up. Slides to multitasking. If I can find them now. Anyway. 144 acres in Perry County, Indiana, to the Indiana DNR. It was to be used as a nature park and retreat. And you can see a video of the transfer ceremony with Governor Mitch Daniels and Governor Whitcomb. And it's a very, very nice video. You can pull it up on Indiana DNR website on YouTube. But it's a really neat video. So, I know that area pretty well. I've spent a lot of time in there, up in Perry County. And so we decided to take a little road trip, myself and a couple of friends. And so we went past the ground. It's a beautiful piece of property outside the Hoosier National Forest on the river in Perry County. And so we drove past Governor Whitcomb's house in Rome, Indiana. It's a quiet little community on the Ohio River. And he was sitting in a rocking chair out there. That's a picture of him. And so we drove past, I waved and said, "Hello, Governor." He said, "Come on up here." So for the next 2 hours, we sat and we had an unforgettable conversation about politics his life, and the lessons he had learned. He gave my friends and I signed copies of his book, Escape from Corregidor, which I'd never heard of. And this book is the topic of today's presentation. There he is signing the book for us on his front porch in Rome, Indiana. The Seattle Post reviewed the book and called it one of the most fantastic stories to come out of World War II. I don't think David Baldacci could have written a more thrilling adventure novel. So here goes an overview of Escape from Corregidor. Ed Whitcomb joined the Army Air Corps in 1939, and he was sent to Miami, Florida, to be trained in global navigation. He was assigned to the 19th Bombardment Group to navigate B-17s around the world. On October 16, 1941, Ed's B-17 departed San Francisco along with 25 other B-17s for Clark Air Base in the Philippines. As Governor Whitcomb recalled, little did I know that I was starting on a strange trip around the world, perhaps unlike that experienced by any other person. Soon after arriving at Clark Field, the troops were reminded that war with Japan was becoming more imminent by the day. They got confirmation on December 8, 1941, that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. Ed was in a group meeting with the base commander when a lieutenant broke into the meeting and yelled, "Here they come." Ed stated, "I rushed out of the building and dove into a trench. There were a series of terrible explosions. Huge weights fell on me until I felt crushed. Everything went black, and the bombing continued for a long time. 57 Japanese bombers had destroyed Clark Field and killed hundreds of Americans of the 19th Bombardment Group." As Ed wrote later, "None of us believed this was the beginning of the end for us. That thousands of us would be spending years behind barbed wire to be starved, beaten, humiliated almost beyond human endurance, and some brutally murdered. Only a handful of us would ever see home again." During the next few weeks, our forces did the best they could to organize and survive the relentless Japanese bombing. Ed stated, "The bombers flew so low they could look directly into the bomb bays when the doors were open." He said, "It was terrifying, and they felt like wild animals being pursued by Whitcomb hunters." They also learned, during the next few weeks, our forces did the best they could to organize and survive the relentless bombing. And they also learned that 85 Japanese warships were sighted to the north of the island. They realized they were trapped with no way to stop the Japanese. The troops were ordered to retreat south into the jungle to try and set up communications equipment, food service, etc. They had to scavenge for anything edible, and Ed stated that iguana stew was one of the more tastier meals. Malaria and dysentery were increasing, and Ed contracted malaria. It took him 3 weeks to recover. Upon recovering in early April 1942, he learned their commanding general had gone to the Japanese to surrender our forces. They were told to surrender their weapons and offer no resistance. Ed discussed this with some fellow officers and learned that quite a number of our forces were against surrender, just like he was. They decided to attempt an escape rather than surrendering, since they knew of the treatment POWs by the Japanese. So away several of them went, heading south in hopes of finding a boat to sail to Corregidor, which was an island 3 or 4 miles off the Bataan Peninsula, and our forces had been there, and there may be some more forces still on Corregidor. Upon reaching the south shore of Bataan, they saw a group of Americans about to depart for Corregidor, so they joined them. This was 105 days after the initial bombardment of Clark Field. As Governor Whitcomb writes, we departed Bataan, We departed Bataan where our friends had died for a cause they believed in. Bataan, where the friends we left were about to begin on the most infamous trek of our century, the Bataan Death March. Upon reaching Corregidor, they found quite a number of American personnel there who were maintaining the basic fortifications our forces had previously established. They had enough food for a few weeks and some communications equipment. Their hope was to be rescued by our submarines because they knew the Japanese would soon focus on Corregidor. American submarines never arrived, and the Japanese began artillery barrages and bombing raids on Corregidor. Governor Whitcomb writes, during the course of each day, the air attacks and shellings were incessant. We would hug the bottom of our foxholes and pray that the shell with our name on it would not arrive. Less than 1 month after their departure from the Bataan Peninsula, our forces on Corregidor were overrun and many were killed or wounded. The book gives a matter-of-fact, chilling account of the invasion and our troops' resistance efforts. Governor Whitcomb writes, no one could ever have convinced any of us that our experiences on Corregidor would make the events of the last 3 months on Bataan seem like a Sunday school picnic. Our forces were now Japanese POWs, and the book gives a sobering account of how our troops were treated. The book also details the abominable conditions of the POW camp, and Governor Whitcomb writes, people began to die in increasing numbers, and it looked as if we would all die if things continued as they were. On Corregidor, Ed met Bill Harris, a Marine lieutenant, and they became good friends. They decided they would rather die trying to escape Corregidor POW camp than being slowly tortured and starved to death. They planned to break away from a work detail, then hide in the jungle until dark, and then hike 3 miles to the ocean, and then swim the 3 or 4 miles back to Bataan Peninsula. On May 22nd, 1942, Ed and Bill's mission began. They made it to the ocean. The sea was rough, and it took Ed and Bill about 8 hours to swim through the ocean to make the swim, relying on Ed's celestial navigation skills, swimming at night, that he'd learned in his military training. Just before dawn, on May 23rd, Ed and Bill reached the southern shore of Bataan. Governor Whitcomb writes, in the cold gray dawn, I turned and had one last look back to Corregidor. Then we both dropped into a clump of bushes, completely exhausted, and did not awaken until about 5 p.m. They made a plan to reach the western side of the Bataan Peninsula, where there were small towns with American-friendly Filipinos. They believed they could rest, recover strength, and locate a sailing craft sturdy enough to sail to China. They began their hike and scavenged what food and clothing they could while making their way through the treacherous jungles of Bataan. As Governor Whitcomb writes, the going became much more difficult. Sometimes we were scaling a cliff that seemed almost straight up, and other times we were feeling our way along the edge of a cliff. It looked like we would walk 3 miles to make a mile of progress. They came upon a small abandoned village, and as they were searching the village, Ed and Bill were spotted by a Japanese patrol who opened fire on them. They ran back into the jungle and hid for 2 days before they continued on their hike. They were now starving and could only travel about a half a mile before stopping to rest. Bill actually began to eat ants, but Ed could not bring himself to do that. They were undaunted and determined to reunite with the U.S. forces, so they pressed on. It wasn't very much further when they found themselves in the middle of a cashew grove. As Governor Whitcomb writes, we had a delicious feast on the tropical fruit. It was Thursday morning, and it was the first food we had since Sunday, except for Bill's ants and a spoiled banana. The food gave the pair renewed energy, and they decided to locate the village of Marone. Ed knew the island very well because he was a navigator. And navigators back then had to also know landmarks and towns as reference points because there were no electronic navigation aids back then. Where they believed they could find friendly Filipinos who would help them. So after resting for 2 days, they set out for Marone. After a day's walk, they reached Marone, where they found a sympathetic family, and they rested for 2 more days. They were informed that the Japanese had confiscated or destroyed all the boats in Marone. So their only option was to continue north up to Subic Bay, where they hopefully could find a more seaworthy craft. The pair walked all night and reached Subic Bay at dawn. They saw a small house near the shore and they approached it. Here they met a Mr. Salvador Savaras. Mr. Savaras showed Ed and Bill to a hut where they could hide from the Japanese, and he provided much needed food and shelter. Governor Whitcomb wrote, the kindness and generosity of Mr. Savaras and the Filipinos touched us deeply, and we felt a warm affection for them. Ed and Bill were anxious to continue, even though Mr. Savaras encouraged them to stay. Governor Whitcomb told Mr. Savaras, quote, fighting is our business, and the U.S. government is not paying us to hide in the mountains until the war is over. Mr. Savaras he didn't understand, but he did locate a sailing craft for them, and he gave them provisions. Governor Whitcomb writes, we knew that the 2,000 miles of water that lay between us and our destination, but however rough it got, it couldn't be more difficult than the 8-hour swim from Corregidor to Bataan, or the 5 days of walking through the mountains of Bataan without any food. So, Ed and Bill set sail for China in the boat provided by Mr. Savaras. It did not go well. It was now June 1942, and it was the rainy season. On day 2 of sailing, a storm came up and slammed them ashore. They were shaken but alive. They decided to make a 15-mile hike to the town of Balayan, where they hoped to find a more seaworthy craft. Ed and Bill reached Balayan, where they did locate friendly Filipinos who spoke good English. They were told that a Senor Lopez owned most of the village and a large plantation nearby. They could stay as long as they wanted, and Senor Lopez would help any way possible. There were also 2 Marine Corps officers in hiding on the plantation, and the 4 could stay together. Ed and Bill were taken to the hideout where they met Marine Corps Lieutenants Chamberlain and Armstrong. The 4 officers had the same goal of escaping and decided to share their plan with Senor Lopez. For the next month, Senor Lopez worked on securing a seaworthy craft for the 4 officers while providing food and secure shelter. After a while, he then informed them that their craft was now ready and outfitted with provisions. Now they needed a sailing plan. The first one didn't go so well. Ed was adamant about only sailing at night so he could use his celestial navigation skills that he learned in the Army Air Corps, and staying relatively close to the shore since it was rainy season until they reached open waters where there were no patrols of Japanese planes and boats. He wanted to do this because they were sure if they were caught by the Japanese, all 4 would be immediately executed. The 3 Marines were anxious to rejoin the fight and were insistent on sailing day and night, even though Ed only wanted to sail at night. With sorrow in his heart, Ed decided not to join them. Governor Whitcomb writes, "So did my association with the 3 U.S. Marines. Somehow I felt I would never see them again. I knew they were impatient to get back into the war. What could be said about men like them? Men who wouldn't quit or admit defeat. Men who survived one battle after another and came back for more until they found their peace in a bloody grave. They were the true heroes of war. They would know no victory parades or rows of ribbons on their chest. There must be a special place in heaven for men like Lieutenants Bill Harris, Reed Chamberlain, and Army Armstrong, who would give their lives so that we on earth might live in peace." So, now alone, Ed decided to return to Senor Lopez's plantation and formulate another plan. Senor Lopez believed there were some Americans who were also eluding the Japanese in a fishing village about 10 miles to the south. So off went Ed on his own. He made the 10-mile hike and found the village and fishermen who took him to a small hut where he met Ralph Conrad and Frank Bacon. He learned they were civilian mining engineers working at a copper mine when the war broke out. They didn't get to their evacuation ship in time, so they had been dodging the Japanese ever since. Ralph and Frank told Ed they were preparing a seaworthy craft in order to sail to Australia. And they asked Ed if he'd like to join them. Ed said it seemed too good to be true. They agreed to sail only at night and to hide ashore during the day. In a few days, off they went. After a few days of successful sailing at night and hiding during the day, they put ashore at dawn. Ed went to look for a suitable spot to rest, and when he returned to the boat, he saw Ralph and Frank with their hands in the air and pistols pointed at them by pro-Japanese Filipinos. The 3 were marched to the town of Agdagran, and Governor Whitcomb writes, "From the first day of the war, I had been bombed, strafed, shelled, shot at, and starved, but nothing had ever been so completely humiliating as being led by pro-Japanese Filipinos through the streets with my hands tied." Ed, Ralph, and Frank had previously decided that if captured, all 3 would say they were civilian mining engineers. For they realized that if the Japanese discovered one of the three was an escaped military POW, all three would most likely be executed. Ed took the name of Robert Fred Johnson. He was an actual mining employee who was already evacuated, so he wasn't on the island. The three of them were then put on a train to the Japanese headquarters in Legazpi, where they were interrogated. The Japanese seemed satisfied with their stories and were told they would be sent to the Santo Tomas civilian internment camp near Manila. So, on August 14th, 1942, Ed, now Robert Fred Johnson, Ralph, and Frank were on their way to the internment camp. Upon arrival, they were escorted through a gate and realized they had been lied to. They were not at Santo Tomas. They were at the infamous Fort Santiago prison. They saw long rows of wooden cages packed with people. As Governor Whitcomb writes, they opened the door and the Japs shoved me into a world unlike anything I had ever seen. It did not seem real standing there in a room full of haggard, expressionless faces staring at me. The book gives a detailed and sobering account of the prison conditions at Fort Santiago. Suffice it to say that the conditions were inhumane. Ed discovered that all the inmates were civilians, no military. Some as young as 16. And they were sent to Fort Santiago prison for crimes against Japan. He met a newspaper editor at Fort Santiago, an editor from Manila, Mr. Bennett, who told Ed that all the prisoners would be routinely interrogated. Very soon, it was Robert Johnson's turn for interrogation. Ed was interrogated relentlessly for days about his identity, activities in the Philippines, and even more relentlessly about pro-American Filipinos. He gave fictitious answers and claimed he did not know the names of the Filipinos he met. He realized the Japs would kill any pro-American Filipinos. During a several-hour session, the interrogator became enraged when Ed stated he did not know the names of the Filipinos he met. They began to kick and hit Ed. One of the interrogators then got a lead pipe and struck Ed across the back and shoulders several times until Ed lost consciousness. He regained consciousness and told the interrogator, "If you're going to kill me, shoot me. Please don't beat me to death." This seemed to satisfy the Jap, and Ed was dragged back to his cell. Ed wasn't bothered for a few days, but he did develop fever and a headache. His malaria had returned. He had smuggled a little quinine in the seam of his pants, which provided some relief. Fort Santiago had no medical facilities for the people there. After 5 days, Ed was again called for interrogation. Governor Whitcomb wrote, "I was still very weak, and I wondered if the Jap would beat me again. Somewhere there was a limit to the amount of torture I could take." This session lasted for about 6 hours with no beatings. Ed realized they were comparing his stories about the mining operation to Ralph and Frank's. As Governor Whitcomb writes, "I made up my mind that the next time I was called for interrogation, I would tell the truth. What Ralph and Frank had done for me was much more than could be expected by any person. I would not see them go through another day of torture for me." The following day, the name Robert Johnson was called for interrogation. As Governor Whitcomb writes, "When I stepped out of the cell, I saw a sight that made me gasp. Down the hall stood Ralph and Frank. I felt sure we would be taken out for execution. All three were ragged, hollow-eyed, and hopeless, expecting their lives to end. They were taken to another building where they were each interrogated. They were returned to the hall when a Japanese officer announced, Ralph Conrado, Franco Bakken, and Roberto Johnson will be taken this day from Fort Santiago to Santo Tomas University. This was hard for them to believe since they had been lied to so much. It was in fact true, and they were on their way to Santo Tomas civilian internment camp to join 3,500 Americans, British, Dutch, and Australian civilians. They reached Santo Tomas in September 1942, where they found living conditions to be luxurious compared to the last 9 months. Excuse me. Ed really needed a haircut and a shave. So he got on the list for the barbershop. Ed struck up a conversation with the barber and learned that many ships took refuge in Manila Bay when the war broke out. The ships were either on their way to or from Shanghai, hence the variety of nationalities in Santo Tomas. The Japanese decided to transfer these people to Shanghai because it was overrun. They didn't have any more room. Shanghai, and all it was required was put your name on a transfer list. Ed immediately did so, and he states, you can learn a lot in a barbershop. The Japanese had control of Shanghai, but if Ed could get there, he felt he would have a much better chance to escape. Weeks passed, and it was suddenly announced that 90 Americans were selected for transfer to Shanghai. Ed rushed to view the list and saw the name of Robert Johnson on the list. He did not see Ralph or Frank's name, and when he located them, he discovered that Ralph was now very ill and could not make the voyage. Ralph decided to stay in Santo Tomas with his friend. Ed's only regret that his friend, Lieutenant Bill Harris, was not with him to make the transfer to Shanghai. He expressed his extreme gratitude to Ralph and Frank and bid them farewell. The next day, the 90 Americans boarded the ship along with many of the other people selected. The Japanese ship was not exactly a Carnival cruise ship, but they safely made the 8-day voyage to Shanghai. The Americans were informed to report to the American Hotel for processing. Ed checked in as Robert Fred Johnson and soon became acquainted with Carl and Shelley Maidans, who worked for Time and Life magazines. And they were sent to Shanghai soon after the war started, so they knew Shanghai very well. Ed became close enough to the Maidans to share his true identity and his journey since the bombing of Clark Air Base. Carl and Shelley were amazed, to say the least. He asked if they knew anyone who might be able to help him with an escape plan so he could get to Chongqing, China, where he believed he could reunite with U.S. forces. They suggested he contact the president of the American Society, Mr. Henningsen. He met with Mr. Henningsen, who provided Ed with clothing, spending money, and an ID for Robert Fred Johnson. Ed respected him tremendously for his assistance. He told Ed that an escape to Chongqing would be extremely difficult, but he'd find out what he could. Weeks went by with no word from Mr. Henningsen. One morning, Ed woke up again with fever, weakness, and headache. His malaria had returned for the third time. He was taken to the infirmary, where he was treated by an American missionary physician, a Dr. Hyla Waters. Since this was his third battle with malaria, Dr. Waters suggested he try a new drug called Salvarsan. He agreed, and in 2 days he recovered. Ed and Dr. Waters became lifelong friends, and Ed never suffered from malaria again. It wasn't long after that the Japanese rounded up influential American and British citizens and put them into a political prison camp. Ed never heard from Mr. Henningsen again. The remaining American, British, and Dutch and Australians were to be transferred again to a Japanese concentration camp for the remainder of the war. So on February 1st, 1943, about 1,000 people were taken to Western Shanghai and put into 2 large buildings on 4 acres enclosed with barbed wire fencing. Not a lot of space for 1,000 people. There were signs around the prison stating, "You are in a civil assembly center and you are deprived of your right to a free life. If you disobey our rules, you will be punished. If you intend to escape, you will be shot." These were all civilians, supposedly. Ed stayed in contact with Carl and Shelley Madans and assisted Dr. Waters in the camp infirmary, which helped break the boredom in the Civil Assembly Center. It was the summer of 1943 when Ed heard of rumors of a repatriation program where Japanese and Americans would exchange civilian prisoners. After about a week later, they were informed that all Americans who arrived from Santo Tomas would be on a list for eligibility for a ship back to the United States. Ed said it was almost too much to comprehend, and there were no dry eyes among them as they sang, "My Country 'Tis of Thee." On October 1st, 1943, several hundred boarded the passenger ship Tia Maru, and they set out for the United States. In mid-October, they stopped in Portuguese Guiana, where they met with a Swedish ship, the Whitcomb, and that's where they exchanged the Japanese for the Americans. They continued to Japan, they went back to America. On a gray December morning, 1943, they awakened to the sight of the Statue of Liberty. Ed realized it was almost 3 years to the day when he last saw the Statue of Liberty as he sailed to Miami to start his training in global navigation. As Ed was in line to disembark, he was approached by a well-dressed young man. And he came up to him and he said, "Are you Robert Johnson and Lieutenant Edgar Whitcomb?" All he could do was give him a bewildered nod in reply. The young man was an FBI agent. This crazy story. From analyzing the passenger list and rumors of Ed's travels, the military suspected that Ed and Robert were one and the same. He gave Ed a train ticket to Washington, D.C. and told him to check in at the Lafayette Hotel. He did so, and the following morning was met by an Army major who took him directly to the Pentagon. He was told to document his ordeal and write what his wishes were for further duty. He spent several days at a typewriter detailing his last 2 years, and he requested to be returned to active duty with the bombardment group in the Pacific. It took the Army 2 weeks to decide that he would be returned to active duty in the Army Air Corps, but in a non-combat role. They were afraid if they found out that a POW had gotten exchanged on a repatriation program, it would end the program. So they put him in a non-combat role. He was promoted to captain and given 2 weeks leave. Governor Whitcomb writes, "I was given a new full dress uniform, and I was once again Edgar Whitcomb, Robert Fred Johnson, who occupied my body for the last year and a half in a world of fantasy, disappeared from the face of the earth." Ed called home to Hayden, Indiana, where he was born, where his family lived, and said the conversation was filled with emotion, tears, and joy. For the last 2 years, the only thing Ed's family knew was that Ed was missing in action. He arrived in Hayden, Indiana, just before Christmas, 1943, and he stated that there had never been such a Christmas at the Whitcomb house. After that, he was sent back to navigator refresher training back in Miami, and was then assigned to a C-54 transport plane, shuttling, that's a picture of it right here, shuttling USO troops, soldiers, supplies between New York, Newfoundland, the Azores, Casablanca, Tripoli, Cairo, and Paris. His training came in handy there. He did this for a year, but yearned to get back with his bombardment group. His friend, Carl Bidens, was transferred back to the United States, and he was sent to be with General MacArthur, taking pictures of General MacArthur and his adventures for Life magazine. And Ed wrote him a letter, and this is what his letter states in parts. Carl, when you see the good general, General MacArthur, when you see the good general, please tell him you have a friend who has a score to settle out there. And he would appreciate it very much if it could be arranged for him to return to the Pacific. Ed went back to navigating the C-54, and after he returned from a flight in April 1945, he received orders stating, Captain Edgar Whitcomb is assigned to the Far East Air Force, Leyte, Philippines, for duty with the 5th Bomber Command. His friend Carl had gotten his request to MacArthur, who gave it to General Kenny, and he made it all happen. Governor Whitcomb reflected on this and wrote, what makes a person give up a secure life and go back to war is something beyond reason and explanation. It is not a desire to do something great or become a hero. One stands a much greater chance of meeting death than becoming a hero. I knew it wasn't bravery because I had been frightened many, many times to the point where I thought I would die from fright. I knew of so many comrades who had died in the POW camps or fighting in the Pacific or shot out of the sky. I also knew of others whose luck ran out on their second tour of duty. The finest fellows I had ever known in my life had died or been taken prisoner at the hands of the enemy. It was my duty to carry on the fight as best I could. In early May 1945, Ed navigated a B-25 to the Clark Air Base in the Philippines. His dream had come true. He was assigned to the 345th Bomber Group, the Air Apaches. They were pretty bad. He participated in daring, low-level bombing missions over Formosa with great success. U.S. forces were now winning the war, and they received word about the atomic bomb, and then they knew the war was over. After much cheering among the troops, Captain Whitcomb decided to go for a walk. He walked until he came upon the ruins which had once been the headquarters of his proud little 19th Bombardment Group. He stopped there, and he closed the book with these words. I'd been standing here 3 years and 8 months ago when an armada of Japanese bombers came out of the north and rained death and destruction on us. A huge black cloud arose that day to blot out the sun, and it seemed to me like the sun had never really shone again since that day. Out to the east, Mount Ararat towered majestically above the Luzon plains, looking down on us mortals below, and it seemed that only God and I and the mountain knew what happened there. Edgar Whitcomb retired then from active duty in 1946. He served in the reserves until 1977, almost 30 years at lieutenant colonel. After he got out of the service, he went to law school at Indiana University, became a lawyer, had a very successful law practice in Indianapolis and Seymour, Indiana. He was Secretary of State, then governor. Then, for something to do, he just decided to brush up on his celestial navigation skills, and he sailed around the world solo in 1995. You know, he was in his late 60s. He was quite a man. So, and he died on February the 4th, 2016. He was 98 years old. And I believe Edgar Whitcomb was truly a great Hoosier and a great American. Thank you for coming. And if you'd like a copy of Escape from Corregidor, we have some over there. Any questions? The book, in the book, the epilogue gives a really good detailed account of all of his friends, Lieutenant Harris, Army Armstrong, Reed Chamberlain, about what happened to them. And it's pretty interesting. So anyway, if you like a good read, it's worth it. Thank you.
Thanks, Spike.
Thank you, John.
So there are some microphones circulating in the crowd. If you've got a question, raise your hand. Don Johnson back there. Tom Wiggers over here. Norman's got a question. I'll get to Norman.
I read a book, I think it was about Harris, that sailed out and they got captured trying to get to Australia or China. But there's a book about him, and he tried to escape a couple times, and they finally came to prison. He survived the war and stayed in the Marines, and he became a major, and he went to Korea, and he was leading a group in Korea, and they were being overrun, and he stayed up, tried to hold them off so his men could get away, and he was killed.
That's true. Yeah, that's in the epilogue of the book.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Bill Harris, Ed's good friend, his dad was a lieutenant colonel in the Marines. And when they sailed off, remember when Ed said, probably never see these Marines again? Well, they were captured by the Japanese, and they knew that, somehow knew that Bill Harris' dad was, high up in the Marine Corps. He sent him to Japan, and he was a POW in Japan until the end of the war, trying to get information, about our forces from him. So he spent the rest of the war in Japan as POW. His dad, who actually writes the introduction to the book, it's a very moving introduction, went and got him from Japan, and Bill Harris and his dad attended the surrender on the USS Missouri together. So they got to see and then, like I said, he's a Marine through and through. Went to Korea and met his end in 1950. Thank you.
I have read that book.
It's great. We have copies over there. I had to read it twice. I didn't want to miss anything. It was a great book.
That's Mike. This is Paul Metcalf here. Good to see
hi.
you again. It's been a while. So, May the 30th of 2012, I stopped by, like you did, at Rome, and went up to talk to Edgar Whitcomb. And Evelyn was there, his girlfriend at that time, before they got married.
Yeah.
And Evelyn was the interpreter because Edgar was a little bit hard of hearing.
Yeah.
But I had brought a book with me that I got from Evansville Central Library, Escape from Corregidor.
I'll be gone.
And we had a chance to talk about that. He took that book and signed it.
Great. Yeah, he signed our copies too.
And I've turned it back into the library. So if you ever go down to the Central Library, you may find
his
it.
wife still lives in that house in Rome.
Evelyn does.
Yeah, she's still alive and living there.
Well, it was a wonderful time.
Yeah.
His daughters, there's four daughters and a son, Tricia and John are friends. And they were meant to be here today, but they had some doctor appointments that took them away. But Trish Whitcomb
and the other girls all became Democrats. Of course, he was a Republican. So on the, maybe you still remember it, on the threshold of the house before you went in.
You went in the house, yeah. Isn't that something
A
inside
form
that house?
out there that said the spin stops here. And so he was a man beyond any measure of a man.
Oh, incredible. And he was just so humble and meek and
He was.
unassuming and just treated everybody like a good friend.
So thanks for putting this on today to bring back those memories of the way he was and the way we should be.
Absolutely. Yes, Sam. Oh, yeah.
Governor was a busy man because my dad was his friend from going to McDonald's in Tell City.
Oh, really?
And I left Tell City in 1960 when I graduated.
Well, you know we're Rome, Indiana.
I definitely do. I took my dad when I would go visit him. We would drive all around Perry County.
Oh, it's beautiful county.
One day, Governor Whitcomb was on the front porch, so we stopped,
Isn't that
just
something?
like you did, and had about 4 hours of just wonderful time. Evelyn was there that day, but she pretty much stayed in the house. This would have been in the 90s,
Yeah.
at least 30 years ago.
Yeah.
She pretty much stayed in the house. My dad knew her too from church. But she just, she said hello and that was about it, and we just got to talk. But while we were there, Randy Harris, who was the mayor of Princeton at the time, I think the youngest mayor in Indiana at that time, he was there with his little girl, but didn't stay too long, so we got to speak with him because we knew his dad from walking at Eastland Mall.
Small world.
Yes. But I wanted to say also, my history teacher in high school at Tell City was Major Otis Solomon. And he was on the Baton Death March. And he gave a speech to the whole school at one time about his experiences. I don't think he would say it was like a Sunday school picnic.
No.
But I'm trying to get the museum to get him here, or get his son here, to speak about that. Because he does give that same speech that his dad gave in high school.
Yeah. And that property, you know how beautiful Perry County is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hoosier National. That property, if you have a chance to Google up on Indiana DNR website, the presentation ceremony between Mitch Daniels and Governor Whitcomb, it shows some of the property. It's a very, very beautiful piece of property overlooking the Ohio River. And it's a nature park and retreat, and it's open to the public.
Is that where the log cabin is, down by the river?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, we got to see that.
yeah.
What is it called? I don't know.
Edgar D. Whitcomb Nature Park and Retreat.
I just thought, he was just a wonderful man.
Oh, he was tremendous.
And he was a
And-
lot younger than what you showed in the pictures.
Yeah, well, that was, yeah.
He was pretty old by that time.
Yes, he was. But he was still sharp
Oh,
as a
yes,
tack.
he was
He
sharp.
really was. And that house of his is something. And he just, and he died and he's buried. He could have went to Indianapolis for, a big state funeral and all. He just decided to stay right there in Tell City.
I thought he was at Hayden where he was buried.
Yeah, he's buried there, but the funeral and showing everything was right there in Tell City. He's just a very common, down-to-earth, great, great person. I mean, I think his experiences probably helped mold him into something like that. It's an incredible read.
Over here. Turn it on.
Linda Morris. Do you know where Bill Harris was from?
Kentucky.
Okay.
Kentucky.
Did he work at Alcoa?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Let's see, I can tell you here, I'm pretty sure it's in the head rights, he calls him the Tall Kentuckian. So I don't know what city in Kentucky, but he called him the Tall Kentuckian. The Tall Kentuckian, yeah. You don't know where.
There's another question, Don.
Coming right there.
Did he ever have any future contact or find the man that he impersonated, the Robert Craig Johnson?
That, there's nothing in the book about that. Unless I'm over.
Mike, you want to repeat the question?
About the mining engineers, that,
Yes.
I don't think, let's see, it's in the epilogue, but I don't think he was able to stay in touch with the mining engineers that he left, had to leave at Santo Thomas. I think they spent the rest of the war there and were released back in the States. But he did stay very, very close with the Harris family up until even after his friend Bill Harris's death in Korea, and they were very close. Well, anyway, thanks again. And,
Thank you, Spike.
appreciate it for coming.
So if you want to hear more stories from Spike, Spike is a volunteer here at the
Yeah,
museum.
in the simulators. If anybody wants to learn to fly, stick around.
Spike's office is to my right, so please see Spike over there, he'll tell you more stories. Then December the 4th, real experiences from Rosie the River. See you then.